of August. Happy birthday to me. Getting really, really old. We'll look at the Utah Jazz and whether they got better as we kick off the Did People in the Western Conference Get Better series. Then we'll look at Chris Paul and Devin Booker and the Phoenix Suns. Eric Paschall is one of the newest members of the Jazz. Is he going to be a rotation player? And is Paschall going to be able to help the Jazz? Plus, Trent Forrest signs a two-way deal. And why does that matter to the Utah Jazz? It's all coming up on today's edition of Locked on Jazz. Pow!
It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. We are free and available on all platforms now. Coming to you on YouTube, often live on YouTube as well for you. Some of the time, depending on the time of the day. We like to get the chat room open and going. So welcome to all the people. Hello to XR who stopped by along the way, commenting on the fact that I lost a lot of hair yesterday in a trip. So shortest haircut I've had in quite some time. Not quite sure what I did here. So this is the problem with being live. When I make a dramatic error like this in August, I usually can get away with it because you don't see me until October. But now by being live, you see it. So anyway, all the fun of that. We are also available on all of our podcast platforms as well. So thanks very much to all of you who tune in, both live on podcast everywhere, and tell 3 friends, because it's our new motto. There's nothing worse than going to a barbecue, starting to hear someone talk about the Jazz and realize they don't listen to Locked on Jazz, and you have to listen to them talk about it. I was in a conversation with a really wonderful person the other day who was telling me how we need to trade Rudy. And by the time we were done, his best answer was, I don't like French people. Because really there was no other good answer for that than why you would possibly do this, of trading Rudy, because you never would want to do that. He makes you win. Anyway, let's get into it. I want to start a series of Did People in the West Get Better? We'll also try to do an interview series. I reached out to Thurl today. We'll probably hear from Bowler. So a bunch of our guys will stop by and talk with Tony Jones, hopefully, as we always do. He had a great offseason as a reporter. Tip of the hat, if you didn't have to see there. Tip of the hat. Oh, I have no hair. Tip of the hat to Tony. He had a fabulous offseason. All right, so the first question is, did we get better? And I think we did, which is fairly remarkable, but I'm not that certain because it actually wasn't an offseason that was built for us to get better. And what I mean by that is, frankly, we had to shed some contracts and move some guys and get out from the tax a little bit and gain, and while simultaneously trying to create roster flexibility. If we really think about the job that Justin Zanuck had in this offseason, it was pretty close to impossible. Shed some salary and alter the roster enough that you kind of give some more versatility to who we are while simultaneously don't get rid of anyone. Okay? So we got rid of Faves, who didn't have a great year. So we got rid of somebody, covered it with Whiteside, moved George Niang, which was painful, but he did not have a good playoffs, covered it with a veteran in Rudy Gay, who I don't know if he'll have as good a regular season in that role as George Niang, but should be a better playoff player. And then added Eric Paschall, who we'll look at more in depth here today on the show. And then in addition to that, added a draft pick, and we'll see. I will tell you, just make sure we're clear on my bias coming in here. Like, I'm not one who jumps the board that 40th picks of NBA drafts, even if they slipped, are going to be versatile or going to be players that actually impact a lot of wins. I mean, I'm hoping he chews up some minutes for us more than anything else. And I think that that's the goal, is that he chews up some minutes and is able to give us some depth and plays all right. But then when it gets to playoff time, I'd be super surprised if he has an impact. Most rookies don't. Most 40 picks don't. This kid might be special. We might have got something, maybe. But I also, like, from a planning standpoint, think that's kind of beyond the reason. Beyond reasonable expectation. So let's hope he can play a little and uses his 3 years at Baylor and the fact that Butler won a national championship while at Baylor and is able to play. So did we get better? So the first concept is I don't really know. And here's my quick thoughts on this. So I think Donovan gets better. He's in his 5th year. Like, this is the natural progression. If you look at when guys win championships and continue to get better, Giannis got better, LeBron got better. Like, you go look, that's the natural. Steph continued to improve. You're getting close to where you're going to have your peak athleticism year, and then you'll probably have some better, mental and physical combination years. Like, this will be Donovan at about his physical peak. And then the next few years will be Donovan at the combination of his experience and physical peak. And then he'll learn, as these great players do, like, okay, so now I'm 30 and what do I do? And what can I do and what can't I do? And how do I play through that? Rudy, I think, is at that same stage. I think we're seeing it. I think last year was probably his physical peak. And now we're going to watch him move into kind of an experience and mental piece. And maybe he adds a little tiny piece or two to his game. So in that sense, I think those two guys could get a little bit better, particularly Donovan, I think, could improve. The rest of our crew, when we start talking about whether we're better or not, let's be honest, we're on the wrong side of the age game with a ton of these guys. And, again, they have experience and they have knowledge, but Bojan, Joe, Mike, Rudy Gay are all post 30. And so I think that gets to be, a difficult thing to expect them to get better at this stage. Can they do the same for us? Can they stay healthy? But they're all on the wrong side. So when you have, and this is actually how you win, is you have this many veteran players, but you also have to expect some of them are going to slip in some ways. We talked about the other day with Rudy Gay at 35 here in 5 days. You can begin to see where that aging is happening. Bojan, I don't think we've really seen it. Joe, we've begun to see maybe some signs of it. Mike, we definitely have seen some signs of it. And so what are these guys going to be able to do? And that we were pretty healthy until the end last year from a regular season standpoint. I do think we're more versatile. I do think we have different options of how to play. I do think we're a player deep. Like when George didn't have a great postseason, we almost got down to and then Mike wasn't available. We got down to 7 players being able to play in the postseason. I think as we dig into Paschall later in the show, he's not going to be a rotation player to start the year. And I think he could actually probably play playoff minutes. So we've gotten deeper in that regard. So we're old, which is good because that's actually how you win. But that also means that you have to be have a little trepidation on whether you really think you've gotten better. I do think Donovan improves. I think we've gotten more versatile. I think Udoka Azubuike might be able to contribute a little bit, so it gives you a little bit more depth. Is Whiteside going to be better in Favors? He's bigger. And then you have some chemistry things. You've really, from a chemistry standpoint, if you believe in that, and we've professed it to be true, so we should act like it matters still. We lost 2 of the guys that most people get along with best, George Niang and Derek Favors. So that's going to be a part of this equation, is that you have to kind of rebuild it. I think that's good. I'm not a big believer in continuity. I think you have to add new personalities to have a feeling of a new team, or else it gets stale, and stale gets complacent. And then I also think this group could have lacked some confidence in that regard. So that's my overall take, which is yes, because I think Donovan and Rudy continue to get better. I'm not entirely certain, and I think we did incredible stuff to be able to, with the limitations because of the luxury tax, and be able to cut luxury tax money and add the versatility and the depth is pretty incredible. Are we better? We'll see. And then we have an aging factor on that. Let's look at the Phoenix Suns with Devin Booker and Chris Paul. Did they get better? And I think the answer here is yes as well. Everyone, the answer a lot of people are asking is, did teams get better? Devin Booker's 24, DeAndre Ayton's 23, Mikal Bridges is 25, Cameron Johnson is 25. They added Landry Shamet, I believe. He's 24. And their only free agent signing was JaVale McGee, so that they now actually have 48 minutes of centers, which they didn't have before. And they can go 48 minutes of 7-footers. And so I do think that they got better. Elfrid Payton replaces Javon Carter, which I actually think is probably not as good, but probably doesn't matter as Cameron Payne's really become their backup. Landry Shamet gives them another shooter. Shamet might be overvalued a little bit as a team. Clearly, the one question on them is the same age issue. Like at some point, Chris Paul at 36 years old has to slow down and not be as good. But if you're going to ask me if I think Phoenix is a better team than a year ago, I'm going to say yes, because Devin Booker should be better. As great as he was, he's got another year of experience. He's got Western Conference Finals experience. DeAndre Ayton took a huge leap last year and should be better at 24 years old. Mikal Bridges took a massive leap last year at 26. And then Cameron Johnson's been really good, and Landry Shamet. So they've got an incredible young nucleus of players that all meld well together and fit well together. And they're getting older and more experienced on their young players. Their negative is the fact that Chris Paul is going to be 36, 37 years old and should slow down at some point. And I do like the two additions they made. Like they changed Javon Carter for Elfrid Payton, seems somewhat irrelevant to me. They added Landry Shamet as another shooter. I don't know if they needed it. Cameron Johnson's really very good. Mikal Bridges is really very good, but it gives them a little bit. He's probably taking the Etuan Moore role a little bit, and Shamet's probably a step up on that. And they've still got Frank Kaminsky, who they re-signed to a one-year, $2 million deal on the back of that. I don't know if Jalen Smith looked to me like he was going to be totally ready to play yet. So I'm going with yes, that Phoenix has gotten better as a team. I'll take your thoughts on that if you want to throw them into the chat room, and we'll hit on it as we continue. Today's show is brought to you by my good friends over at grip6.com. The Grip6 Utah company doing amazing things with their belts, their wallets, and their socks. With the promo code Locked On, you get 15% off. You also can just go start it off with the men's classic pack, which just for $100, you really end up with 9 belts. Think about how amazing that is, because you get 3 buckles and 3 straps, brown, black, and gray, with the silver gray buckle, the brown, and the black, and you can interchange them all you want, or you just figure you got 3 belts for $99. You never interchange them, but it takes 2 seconds to mix and match. And unlike the leather belts, your buckle and swap, you'll damage. There's no damage to this. It's easy to do. There's no moving parts. They fit perfectly. And then you have the great Grip 6 aspect, which is no holes, no flaps, or no bulk, an unlimited lifetime warranty. Feel free to check out the 8 days a week pack of socks as well. They've got a new Blue Jay midweight strap available for you. So they're continuing to innovate, continue to do new things. If you're looking, you don't want to need the starter pack and you're looking, they also have some pre-discounted packs or discontinued. There's a pack right now for $199. You get 4 straps and 4 buckles, and all the buckles are super high end. They're my 4 favorite buckles. If you're all right spending $200, that's the one I strongly suggest right now at grip6.com. Again, promo code LOCK gets you 15% off, but those 2 deals I shared with you, they have, frankly, if you could just put somewhere in there, let them know you heard from Locked On, because those deals are actually better. So I don't want you to lose out on the best deal you possibly can get by just, using our promo code. I want to introduce you to a new sponsor on Locked On. It's a pretty interesting company. It's another Utah company. It's called Sweat Block. So it's doctor created, doctor recommended. It works up to 7 days per use. Okay, but I got to really tell you what it is. So Sweat Block it's a wipe, and you wipe it on if you are, a big time sweater, or maybe you've got an event coming up where you've got to speak in public and you're worried about it. Works. You know what? If you've got a high school kid who kind of excessively sweats, it's pretty uncomfortable and embarrassing at times, no fault of their own. This is a pretty incredible product that helps with excessive sweating. And actually, as I said, works up to 7 days. We were talking with Chase, the owner the other day, and he says, I'm not an excessive sweater. So I was trying to figure out. So I went for a run. I used it on one side, but not the other, and ended up with absolutely dry on one side and obviously my usual amount on the other. It's a pretty interesting product where this is a great example where science is doing it. It's stronger and more efficient than clinical antiperspirants. You simply apply it at night before bedtime, before going to bed. The next morning, you wake up, wash, and go about your day without worrying about it. Guaranteed. It's pretty amazing. Get 20% off Sweat Block right now at sweatblock.com with the promo code Locked On, or at Amazon or CVS. All really in 10 years they've been on Amazon, kind of quietly existing, and now they're out there for everyone to go get a little secret confidence, take care of a little issue. It's a must for the toiletry bag, whether it's a big presentation, a hot date, or whatever it might be. It's called Sweat Block. You can get it at sweatblock.com with the promo code Locked On. You get 20% off. It is Locked On Jazz, daily podcast on the Jazz. We do this every single day. Thanks to all the people in the chat room. Court says that the bench unit is Butler, Clarkson, Ingles, Gay, and Whiteside. Seeing it like that gets me so excited. I don't know. I think the bench unit, I think we're going to see a very similar rotation to what we saw a year ago so our first substitutions were Ingles and Clarkson with Conley, Ingles, Clarkson, and Favors with Conley going out. Was it Boyan going out? I'd have to look back at who the third substitution is. That's kind of where I paused. And Favors. So you're now going to have Whiteside coming in for what was Favors. You're going to have Donovan slide to the 1. You'll have Clarkson slide to the 2. You'll have Ingles still coming in the game in that spot like he usually did. And then Rudy Gay probably comes in for Boyan. So I actually don't think, I think it's that unit is Donovan, Clarkson, Ingles, Gay, and Whiteside. I do think there's a little possession issue there. Like there's a lot of guys that want the ball. And then the next side of that is your next substitution is Conley and Gobert come back together since they match each other. And now it's Conley with Clarkson, with Ingles, with Gay, and with Gobert. And then on the nights where Conley doesn't play, Ingles slides in, Butler plays your backup 1, Donovan stays as the 2 in that rotation a little bit, I think. And as Rudy Gay gets older, or you have a night where you're trying to go small, or you're just trying to give some guys a break, Paschall comes in and can either play, if we're trying to play small, he can play in a bunch of different ways. I think he just can play in multiple things. And so what you have now is Joe can suddenly slide to the 1 if you need him to. Frankly, I suspect in the regular season that we're still going to see Joe Ingles playing the majority of those minutes as the backup point guard, and I'm not sure that Butler plays. But I'm just not a believer in rookies. Like unless you're building it from the bottom up and you're playing your rookies, if you just go look at last year's playoffs, other than Terrence Mann, there really wasn't a first or second year player that had any impact, unless I'm forgetting somebody in games. And so I just don't expect to see a lot of that happening from any of these teams. That's not the way I see the game, and it's not the way I think that we've seen it take place over the years. So, I think that's, we can get excited about Butler's a draft pick. I'm not trying to, I guess I am. I'm throwing water on that excitement. It's just, that's the reality. This league's just brutal. Paschall's interesting to me. Let's talk about him a little bit. So he's 6'6", 255, which is a unique body. I will say, I do feel like we have a phenomenon going on in the NBA that everyone's trying to recreate Draymond Green, and like whether it was Brandon Bass or Spellman out of Villanova or Jordan Bell along the way, or it just seems like every year, it's the next Draymond. There's not a next Draymond. Like these guys are mid-sized guys that fit different positions and they don't quite match, and they're tweeners, and they're still all like, we like tweeners more than we used to, but there's still like issues with that, right? Like let's just be honest about that. He's interesting in that he's 6'6", 255, which is like a wild body with a 6'11", almost 7-foot wingspan and a 38-inch vertical jump. So some of the physical shortness gets overcome by the length and the vertical jump. He's not a great defensive rebounder so far in his career. So, that's where sometimes, it's great to have the vertical jump, but you've got to also just have the reach to go get the ball. He has not been active at all in the offensive glass. In fact, non-existent on the offensive glass almost in Golden State. And his defensive rebounding has only been okay. It's interesting to kind of look at how they played him. Last year, they played him 65% of the time as the center. The year before, they played him like 76% of the time as the power forward. So they fiddled around with him in different realms. Last year at Golden State, as the Golden State got better, they made him play a little differently. But honestly, his rebounding numbers aren't great. So that's where like that size issue matters. His shooting as a catch and shoot guy in college, what I really went back and did on him, and this is, time will tell whether this is right. What I thought was, there's two things about him. One, he was an old college player. So on old college players, I just don't think there's a great deal of growth that's about to happen. And so sometimes those scouting reports are interesting to me because they tell you a little bit like of who the player is and what he does. And so those old scouting reports talked about a guy with kind of an average catch and shoot that was an unbelievably great college finisher who was able to defend at different things, half decent in isolation, had a good free throw shooting percentage, which is absolutely held. He was 77 in college. He's 76 in the pros, which leads you to believe those shooting lacked that explosive first step, but had this really good body. I think a lot of that has parlayed. What I do think is interesting about him at Golden State is the first year he started 26 games. He played a pretty good amount. I think he ended up playing about 28 minutes a game. They were awful. They were just awful. And he just got put it out there like he and Jordan Poole and a bunch of guys as kind of almost sacrificial lambs, I would say, where, someone had to eat up the minutes and he had to play it. He shot 29% from three, but he was just also not a realistic, like I went back and watched one of those games with him. Like, that's not how you're going to use him. Like, we're never going to use him like that. To me, he struck as coming out of Villanova as a player that would be good on a really good team. Like, that he passes the ball, he's versatile, he can play multiple positions, he understands the game. And then he ends up getting to the Warriors and they have all the injuries and they're awful. So he doesn't really get to do that. And then you go and take him last year, and because Draymond's back and they slid him to center, what they really did with him is the lineup that he played the most with last year was Brad Wanamaker, Damon Lee, Kent Bazemore, Andrew Wiggins with him as the center. And then Kelly Oubre instead of Kent Bazemore, and then Michael Mulder instead of Kelly Oubre, and then like Andrew Wiggins off the floor. Those were his four most common lineups that accounted for about 25 to 30% of his minutes played, were in these kind of weird groupings that just, there's not a good player on the floor in any of those lineups. When he played he got to play a little bit with Steph, but not a lot. And so, that's, to me, you wonder, obviously anybody who plays with Steph looks good, and you wonder whether he could have played next to, he and Draymond are probably, everyone wants, again, that's the Draymond thing. But like, he ended up playing, I think it was about 30% of his minutes with Steph on the floor. And they were terrible defensively when that was going on. He was only on the floor with Draymond for a very short period of that time. And again, he was playing either with Wiseman, who's not ready to play, or he was playing at center. So I think what's interesting about him is he has all these skills. He's a good college finisher who then got to the NBA and played a little differently. He's actually been a pretty strong finisher at the rim in pros too. Like, I think his strength and body and use of both hands, all the things that actually we thought would translate for him in college have in fact translated for college, but he's never gotten to play in a system that I think works for him best, which is being the fifth best player on the floor. I'd argue in some of those lineups, they're probably asking him to be the best player on the floor. So, he was 73% on the rim the first year. He's 71% overall in the first 2 years. And his mid-range game has actually been fine. He's a 47% long two shooter, which isn't, you don't want a lot of him, a 30% three-point shooter. He really jumps when he shoots, really, really jumps when he shoots. And so his shot is inconsistent in that regard. He was a below-average spot-up shooter last year. He's not great in transition because he's not an elite athlete. What is the most interesting little piece of the puzzle with him that I will leave you with is that at Villanova, he played with the ball in his hands a little bit. And at Golden State last year, he played with the ball in his hands because they made him into Draymond. And he was quite a good, limited amount here, but quite a good pick and roll ball handler, handling the ball. Like, for Quinn Snyder to use his versatility, this is a very, very small sample size, but it's not tight, it's not perfect, but he can both set the pick and run off something if you're doing, and using him in different fashions. He's probably better as a pick and pop guy in some ways, but he's not awful with the ball in his hands. Very, very limited size. Let me just be perfectly clear. We're talking about, 20, 30 plays in here, but you kind of, again, because he's an older player, what's interesting to me about him is I think that you saw a lot of the things you saw in college still translate. And when he was the year before, he did it, and he was in 2 years at Golden State. And again, we're talking probably at this point 60 possessions. So not a lot, but he was really good in all these circumstances where he played with the ball in his hands, which I think is at least an interesting note. We'll get some of your questions and your thoughts. Plus, Trent Forrest signs a 2-way deal. It's actually a pretty big deal for the Jazz, and I'll explain why here in a second. Today's show is brought to you by Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business that's been in the car business for over 20 years. And you know what? They're there for you to get reliably low prices for every customer. They have everything you need, from brake parts to tail lamps to motor oil to even new carpet. And the fact is, you don't need to go into a brick and mortar store so you can spend 30, 50, or even 100% more on the same parts from chain stores, car dealerships. Save time, save money, and use rockauto.com. Right? Locked on in the How'd You Hear About Us box when you get there. It's an old school, easy to navigate site. Explore their website today and find the solutions for your auto parts needs. You'll get amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need. If you're going to get into the action this weekend, or with college football coming up and the NFL, and you want to put some stuff down for the season, it's betonline.ag. Betonline.ag is our preferred gaming spot. A 50% welcome bonus for you with the promo code Locked On. All Major League Baseball. Ohtani's on the mound tonight for the Angels. They are a underdog to the Toronto Blue Jays. That's always a fun one to watch with Ohtani. So if you want to jump aboard that, they actually do have summer league games that you can bet on, crazy as that might be. But they do have them. WNBA, Storm and the Sun with a big one tonight. The Sun are actually favorites. They get back into action after the Olympics. NBA futures as there as well. As I just talked about, that I thought the Suns got better. They have the Suns at plus 1,600 and the Jazz at plus 1,800. They have the Lakers, Warriors, Clippers as the top 3 teams for championship odds in the NBA in the West, followed by Phoenix with Utah at 5, Denver at 6, Dallas at 7, and a big drop to Portland at 8, I think, if I have that right. Lakers at 1 on betonline.ag, Warriors at 2, Clippers at 3, Suns at 4, Jazz at 5, Nuggets at 6, Mavericks at 7. I can't wait until we get over-under win totals. I'm just going over because people forget about Rudy. BetOnline.ag, promo code Locked On, gets you 50% welcome bonus. Bryce says, last year you liked Joe off the ball more than bringing it down. Do you think the Jazz will do that this year? Joe likes on the ball more than off the ball, which is part of the issue. So Joe likes to have the ball in his hands and keeps him engaged, and he seems to play better that way. So I think that's probably a bigger issue than what I like. Joe is the number 1 or number 2 player in the NBA over the last 5 years on early shots. Like, I think in the first, I'd have to run it again. It's something like in the first, 7 or 8 seconds. I don't know. I could probably try to run it right now. I probably couldn't. I'm not that good. Maybe I'll remember to have it for tomorrow. In the first 6 seconds, 8 seconds of the shot clock, Joe Ingles is the number 1 or 2 shooter in the league. Now, he only takes it if it's open. I got it. But get him down the floor early, push ahead to Joe, and let him get those early threes. I mean, what we did last year is we took early threes. I want Joe to be a large part of that. That's where Boyan's outstanding. Let's let Joe do that too. If Butler can play a little bit so that Joe doesn't have to be the backup point guard, that would be great to get that. I also like to get Joe's minutes down. Just the aging game is on the wrong side of him. Jeff Riley asked, is Quinn going to save Rudy Gay at the 5 lineups for the playoffs? You're not going to wear out a 35-year-old guy in the regular season. When there's times you'll do it. Quinn's not a big wait for the playoffs guy, though, quite frankly. So I think that I think that's one where he's pretty careful on how you use Rudy Gay. But yes, I think that's one. Playoffs get smaller and throughout the year. And I think that's a case where you'll probably see that. You talk about this is from Jared Hurst. You talk about great defenders that can shoot or all-stars. Do players similar to Danny Green in their prime now deserve all-star status today? I love defensive players that can hit a 3. There are very few. Danny Green's a great example. Mikal Bridges is going to be what's interesting to see is how he develops, because that's kind of out of the Danny Green model. I mean, Danny Green's making – what did Danny Green get this offseason? I don't remember, but I know he was projected at 10 or 12 million. There's a reason why Danny Green's been on a bunch of really, really good basketball team. Danny Green, 2-year, $20 million deal. That's a pretty good deal by Philadelphia. I think they might have gotten better, by the way. And we'll see if they trade. I mean, they're in total disarray. It's an interesting team to me because they're in total disarray, and yet I actually feel like they're going to get better. Yeah, I mean, if you can find Royce is a pretty good example of this. Like, right, like you have a defensive player that can hit a three. They're hard to come by. And if we look up on B-Ball Index at the guys who have the most difficult defensive assignments all the time, a lot of them are the Ferguson, Terrence Ferguson's, Torrey Craig's. Like, not very many of them are shooting above their weight for three-point shooting. And so if you can find the Danny Green type, you can do it. I don't know where he is defensively at this point. I'd like to see your analysis on where the coaching staff can improve. I think Quinn and company is the best there is, but there are areas of concern. Well, I think he's got a more versatile lineup, so I think we'll be able to see him be able to do more and more things. I'm kind of lost. I got a text from someone who I really respect in the league the other day about, playoff adjustments. I'm lost on what the adjustment is with that lineup on the roster they had. Like, not play Rudy? Like, I don't think that's an adjustment that I'm that interested in being a part of. Nathan says, watching the Olympics, Rudy was sealing and dunking over smaller defenders. Do you think Quinn saw that and began immediately game playing with that in mind? Well, can he get the non-NBA player, Olympic players to play for the opposing teams? Right? Like, I mean, that's the issue. Now, does Rudy need to get to a point in the NBA where if the Clippers are playing 5 small guys, but they're not, but this is the misnomer here. The Clippers didn't go small. They were 6'8", 220 across the board at every position. Terrence Mann was their shortest player, and they did a brilliant job of running Terrence Mann out of every pick and roll, and every time the Jazz wanted to take Terrence Mann down to the post or do something to him, because the next closest player was always 6'8", 220. See, you'll see circumstances like where the Warriors will bump Draymond on so Draymond gets involved. Well, the way you deal with that is you move Draymond's man along the floor. You couldn't do that to the Clippers because every guy they had was 6'8", 220. And so if you're trying to, like, whenever we ran Reggie Jackson into a pick and roll, who's 6'4", by the way, they doubled, right? Every time we tried to get somebody up, they doubled. Now, because the reason they could do that is because the other guy involved was guaranteed to be 6'8", 220. So, yeah, like if we had played the Phoenix Suns in the playoffs, and they tried that with Cameron Payne or Chris Paul, then Rudy Gobert has got to be able to go down and take Cameron Payne or Chris Paul and pack their ass. Like, there's no question. That has to be able to happen. But 6'8", 220 Marcus Morris, like, that's not happening. 6'8", 220 Paul George, probably not happening. I mean, it's just where that lineup was brutal. If we were playing the Bucks and they have Bryn Forbes on the floor and they try that, bam, pack his ass. But that's not, and yes, that is where Rudy has to develop. But let's make sure we're perfectly clear about like what it was in the playoffs last year of who it is he was trying to pack on, right? So, if it's this year, if it's the Lakers are pretty big again, right? Like, I'm trying to figure out what the Lakers starting lineup is entirely because they lost so many players along the way. But if they've got their big lineup on the floor, you're not going to be able to do that to the Lakers. I mean, they're going to be interesting because they're going to have to just be the most outstanding. The Lakers are going to have to be the most outstanding defensive team. We'll talk about it tomorrow or the next day is one of these days when we do this. But, so if they have Dwight Howard and Anthony Davis and LeBron James and Russell Westbrook and whatever player they want to have out there as their two guard, like, well, Rudy's not taking any of those guys down the post and packing on them, unless it's maybe Kendrick Nunn, but I don't think so. Or maybe it's Wayne Ellington. But not a lot, right? Because they're not the same thing as these European players. Trent Forrest signed a 2-way deal. Here's why this is important. Because, again, Jared Butler, I know we're excited about it. He's a rookie. There aren't a lot of rookies. Trent Forrest is also a rookie. But we know that if Butler's, whatever his injury is now, whatever his injury was, whatever these injuries issues are, if it's just hard for him to adjust, like, we know right now that Trent Forrest can give us 14 minutes of NBA action as a regular season backup for the Jazz to help out. And he's got a great body. He's 6'4", 210. And I think his wingspan is, Butler's small. Butler is 6'3" with a 6'4" wingspan. Trent Forrest, I believe, and I'll have to check it again, had a pretty decent wingspan and standing reach. That was a weird year because it's the COVID year, and so not everybody measures quite the same way they usually do. So I'd have to go try to find it somewhere. But I think if I remember correctly, he's like 6'7", 6'7.5". So he's much bigger and longer than Butler. And, obviously the 19% 3-point shooting that he had last year is just not great. And this is why he didn't get a deal with someone. I said it yesterday on the show. I just didn't think that he would probably be able to get a deal. It's a 25% college 3-point shooter and a 19%, but he can play. He plays so beautifully. He understands the game. He understands spacing. He understands placement on the floor. He does all that so beautifully that I think that what you're going to be able to see from him is a really interesting player who, if breaking place of emergency, is ready to go. And that's a pretty important thing to have on a two-way contract and on this roster. So that was a big move because if he goes, we don't really have a way to do that. And he knows our system. So that's pretty exciting to see. Wrap this up by saying hi to Ben in Philippines who just stopped by to say hi. It's 12:20 in the morning there. That's the beauty of these live shows. Thanks for being a part of the Locked On Jazz community. Thanks for everybody who tuned in live. This is Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight and expertise. Tell your friends about the show because you don't want to go to a barbecue where the other people are talking Jazz and haven't heard Locked On Jazz. We'll talk to you tomorrow. We'll look at the other teams in the Western Conference, continue the series to did they improve in the West, and we'll run through a little bit more of where the Jazz sit. It's all coming up on Locked On Jazz. Right now, tell your smart device to play the most recent episode of podcast Locked On Today. Have a good one.